I think most people have the intuitive understanding that appreciation, the act of noticing and acknowledging, somehow linked to well-being. To the extent that this is true, it's good news because opportunities to appreciate abound. Let's take a very small example. Riding an elevator, a lift, if you will. It's something you can do almost on autopilot. You push the button for your floor, and you only need to pay enough attention to get off at the proper time. That's it. But imagine an alternative where you really try and notice and appreciate the experience. You notice, for example, how the parking level is suggested on the buttons. In some elevators, it's with a letter P for parking. In others, it's a letter B for basement. And in still others, it is with a negative number, presumably because that level is below ground. And while you're flexing your mindfulness muscles, you also appreciate the fact there is no 13th floor, probably because that number is associated with ill fortune. And while you're there, you notice there's no 14th floor. And just as you're about to put your hands on your hips, turn to the people next to you and say, how many stories is this building? You notice there's no 4th floor. Together, this lends evidence to the old adage, the more you look, the more you see. And I believe that appreciation as noticing is one of the unsung aspects of travel for those of us who are fortunate enough to do so. For when we're in our hometowns, we grow accustomed to life. In all honesty, we take things for granted. We don't stop and marvel at the color of street signs. We don't puzzle over the design of a shopping cart at the grocery store. We kind of know what a mailbox looks like. And yet, when we're abroad, it is exactly these types of mundane details that just blaze to life in a kind of a mental technicolor. This is why our travel days feel so pregnant with experience, so emotionally loaded. We're just seeing, we're appreciating so much more than we would in our day-to-day lives. We realize, more than anything, that people overseas are doing the exact same things that we're doing. They're just doing them differently. Who's cutting this guy? I am here to argue, not for appreciation, but to suggest that we can turn the volume up on appreciation, and that we can do so by something that is often overlooked, and that is connoisseurship. Yeah, connoisseurship. The development of expertise large and small, capital E and small e, and not for its own sake, but to apply to expertise so that you can evaluate the experience that you're having. Let's take the prototypical example of connoisseurship, wine connoisseurship. Imagine two people, both of whom enjoy wine. One of them can give you a, yeah, I like it, or meh. But the other person has developed a sense of connoisseurship. They know grape varietals. They know growing regions. They know the standards by which we should be judging each particular style of wine. They've developed a sophisticated vocabulary for the aromas and the other facets of the wine tasting experience. Both of these people can enjoy wine, but this person, truth be told, can appreciate it in a much more robust way. This person has the formal frameworks and vocabulary to just interact with the wine tasting experience in a more formal and a more multidimensional way. Connoisseurship. It's tempting when we use this example to think of connoisseurship as an effete concern that is confined only to the most aristocratic tastes. But that's not true. It is for every experience we have, because connoisseurship isn't just formal expertise, as in a graduate degree. It is just expertise which exists on a continuum, just budding knowledge that we can apply, because that is the second element of connoisseurship, the application of that knowledge, and we can apply it to anything. We could apply it to pop culture concerns, like comic books. Let's take the example of Amazing Spider-Man number 95, published in early 1971. And let's just start here. For those of us who have some connoisseurship, some budding expertise in the geography of London, you will recognize the sheer impossibility of this scene taking place. You cannot stand on the Queen's Walk, look roughly due north across the Tower Bridge, and see 1 block away Big Ben. You understand that the artist, John Romita, was catering to an American audience. Let's throw some bobbies in there. How about a double-decker bus or two? I'm surprised he didn't put Doctor Who in it, probably a copyright violation. But it is just that knowledge that allows you to kind of appreciate the choices that this artist is making and the rationale behind it. You might also better appreciate this particular issue if you look at the tiny stamp in the upper right. This is the stamp of the Comics Code Authority, a censorship organization that was an effort to bypass government regulation. In the 1950s, it was started because people were worried that comic books were going to corrupt the innocence and the morality of youth. So they had strict rules about the depiction of horrors, no werewolves, no vampires, no depictions of drug use in comic books. And if you saw the stamp of approval, you knew it was safe for your kid to read. What's noteworthy about Amazing Spider-Man 95, it is the last Amazing Spider-Man that was printed with this particular seal of approval. Stan Lee wrote a 3-issue story arc that was from 96, 97, and 98 that did not have the stamp of approval, because all 3 of those issues dealt centrally with the scourge of drug use in New York City and Spider-Man having to help people with drug problems. Those 3 issues changed the Comic Code Authority forever. Instead of saying there's no rationale that we could ever depict drug use, they thought, well, surely we could if we depicted it as a potential hazard or a problem. We essentially could use these books as a public service announcement. And the Comics Code Authority changed their rules around how drugs were portrayed in comics. And starting with issue 99, the stamp was back under new management with the new rules. Hopefully, just knowing these small things makes what you might dismiss as a frivolous comic book come to life with a little bit more appreciation. We could develop an artificial intelligence and program it with expert knowledge that it could then apply to discern the quality or make distinctions between things. And I think we would be reluctant to suggest that that AI is a connoisseur. And it's because it would be lacking the third and crucial element of connoisseurship, that you actually have to be experiencing the thing, experiencing the film you're critiquing, experiencing the meal you're critiquing. It must have an emotional component in addition to that cognitive expertise. And here, let's take the example of modern abstractionist art. You have all heard at some point someone say the following, and maybe you've even said it yourself. I just don't get it. Kind of seems like a gimmick, seems like something a child could do. I think I could do that. But listen again. I just don't get it. What is it a person is saying other than, I confess I have not developed connoisseurship? I simply do not have a web of knowledge that I've cultivated in which to ensconce this particular work, this particular artist, or this particular school of art. I know not enough about the long history of art or the techniques involved in artwork to understand the significance of this particular piece. If I did know, then I think I would appreciate it more. So let's take a little bit of time and try and appreciate this. This is a work by Mark Rothko. This is a typical late period piece by Rothko. His earlier pieces had figurative elements in them, sort of objects. But Rothko felt that viewers came loaded with their own presuppositions, biases, backstories, emotional baggage related to things like flowers and faces. And he hoped to remove all of that to make the viewing experience as pure as possible. He was interested in depth, using as simple of shapes as possible, the contrast often between two shapes or two colors, in which to create the smallest amount of depth without any bias or presupposition. And he painted big. He recommended that people stand half a meter away from his paintings. He wanted you to get right in there, to notice the brushstrokes, notice the fission, the conflict, the tension in those border areas between each color. He wanted you to see the individual brushstrokes, to really take it in and experience it. Rothko once said, "There is no such thing as a good painting about nothing." At the very least, that suggests that Rothko thought that he was painting something, and it is maybe for us to figure out what that something is. Now, you don't have to like this. Appreciation isn't about giving it a thumbs up. It isn't about saying, "Yeah, I love it." It's about noticing it and understanding it. And my hope is, just in telling you these few ideas about Rothko, you can better appreciate it regardless of whether you like it. But here's something interesting. This is different than this. I kid you not. This one that we're looking at right now is a forgery. I'm being serious. This is a forgery of the earlier one, created by a very talented artist who, once the forgery was discovered, fled the country and went into hiding. This forgery was sold for millions of dollars by a gallery to an unsuspecting art collector, who, as you might imagine, once it came to light, sued the gallery and had his day in court. Now, isn't this interesting? This is also a piece of art. This is a courtroom illustration by a talented artist who was recreating a Rothko, and this is a work by a talented artist who was recreating a Rothko. This one is illicit because it purports to be something that it is not, and this one is sanctioned because it tells you exactly what it is. And when I thought of that, I think I did what anyone would have done. I interviewed the courtroom illustrator. Elizabeth Williams is one of the United States' premier courtroom illustrators. She's been at it for more than 30 years, and she is, more than any other person I've ever met, an eyewitness to history. Some of the most landmark cases in my country, she has sat in the room and seen these people up close and personal and had the opportunity to draw them. And so when I contacted her, I said, "You knew you were going to draw a Rothko. Did you practice it ahead of time?" She said, "No, I really don't need to practice. But I will tell you what I feel my job is. As a courtroom illustrator, my job is to make you feel like you were in court." And I had never thought of it that way. To make you feel like you were in court that day. And in order to do that, some elements have to happen. First, a faithful rendering. I have to depict the events as they occurred. The colors have to be accurate. The characters have to be actual people who were there that day. The gestures, everything, is a factual and faithful representation of the events. However, to pull you in, there is also an interpretive element. That is, I'm choosing the moments of the highest drama. For example, you might be interested to know that this forgery was up against the wall all day, sitting there because it was so big they didn't want to bring it in and out, so it just sat there as court went on. And finally, they brought the victim in, and he wouldn't make eye contact with it. It was too painful for him. This reminder of the millions he had lost, of how he had been victimized, taken advantage of, how he had lost trust in the entire art-selling system. And then, while he was on the stand, it caught his corner of his eye, and he just turned and gestured to it, and she thought, that is the emblematic moment. That's what I want people to understand. That's what I chose, and a choice, in fact, happened. I was so enchanted by hearing the depth and sophistication with which she talked that I went out and bought her book, which I highly recommend. She wrote a whole book on courtroom illustration. And it's by all sorts of courtroom illustrators. This scene, for example, that's the cult leader Charles Manson attacking the judge in court. I didn't know. She told me an interesting fact about courtroom illustration in England. In America, you can render in the courtroom, but in England, you cannot. Local artists have to memorize the scene, then dash out and do it all from memory. And Elizabeth has the most respect for her overseas colleagues. While I had her on the phone, I asked her about a more recent illustration that I had seen just the week before. And this was at a trial between former President Donald Trump and E. Jean Carroll, depicted here in white. And I said, Elizabeth, I cannot help but notice that there is an American flag. I just want to know, was that on purpose? Were you trying to suggest to the viewer the political context or overtones of this particular case? And she said, that's interesting, Robert. No is the answer, but in a bigger sense, yes, I have done that. For example, I have often illustrated cases where, let's say, a drug kingpin from another country is brought to the United States, and in those cases, I always make sure to include an American flag. It is a choice because I want to convey to the viewer that this is a foreign national being tried on American soil, and the flag is the best symbolic way to do that. But in this case, no, I just did it. She said, but I'm so glad that you brought that up, because look at those little diagonal lines next to the flag. Do you see those? That's something, and it's something I chose to leave out. I said, tell me more. She said, there is, in this courtroom, and I'm in this courtroom all the time, a big purple tapestry. It's notoriously difficult to draw, and it clashes with what everyone wears, and it's very distracting. So if I'm faithful to what the court actually looks like, it takes away from the drama of the action in the case as it unfolds. Let me show it to you. This is what the courtroom actually looks like. And there's the American flag, exactly as Elizabeth had drawn it. And you can see the diagonal lines, exactly as she suggested them, but mostly left out. And I want you very clearly to understand what I've been doing over the last 5 minutes. I don't know if you remember that we're talking about connoisseurship. But what I've done is I've reverse engineered connoisseurship. Remember, I said that third element was emotion, and what I wanted is to infect you with my own passion for art, my own passion for these topics. And I thought that if I could pull in just the slightest amount of interest from you, it might make you open to learning. And that learning is the seed of expertise. And what you have right now about courtroom illustration is more expertise than you had 20 minutes ago. And what I hope is that you have enough that you can now apply it to every subsequent interaction you have for the rest of your life with courtroom illustration. I want your relationship to be different forever with courtroom illustration. You're going to see courtroom illustrations in 2 weeks from now. You're going to be opening a magazine, going through your news feed. And where before you would have just dismissed it as a mildly interesting adjunct to the story you were reading, what I hope you do is stop and take a look at it, to appreciate it through the lens of connoisseurship, to think, to what extent do I feel like, at least for this moment, I know what it's like to be in that courtroom? To what extent am I considering the choices the artist made? Why is it that it is this moment they chose to render? What is it that they chose perhaps to leave out? How is it framed? Who's included? And imagine, if you can do this with courtroom illustration, something so simple and so quickly, you can do it not with dozens or hundreds, but with thousands of topics. And this is how what I'm talking about, this connoisseurship, is different than those elevator buttons. That is detached mindfulness, just noticing, which is also amazing. But this is being emotionally involved and having a formal understanding and being able to evaluate through your own expertise. And I think that if you do this, all of your life and all of these mundane details will blaze to life, and you will have a more vibrant and purposeful life. Thank you.